people suffering from similar symptoms that we've seen in Missouri, and we've been seeing in the Gulf of Mexico. This is the devastation that was left by one of these half-mile wide tornadoes. You know, a normal tornado around Tornado Alley, which is North Texas and Oklahoma, Arkansas and all that area. You know, you can see a tornado sometimes will literally wipe out one side of the street and leave the other side intact. That these things took out whole towns. So this stuff is being spread. I mean, I made the observation, you know, in the DVD that I recorded last July. I said that the BP, Deepwater Horizon event, is a long-term population reduction event. And ultimately, probably it may take a generation or so, but the southeastern United States, because of what's been going on and what's still going on in the Gulf of Mexico, the southeastern United States will effectively be a toxic zone. You know, there'll probably be lives there, human life there, but not everybody necessarily is going to be affected, but it's going to be a toxic area. And has anybody heard of the term fracking? No? Yeah. Fracking? Yeah, well, fracking is the process of stimulating a gas reservoir in particular. And fracking has now found its way into the UK, and in fact it's believed that the fracking operation is what caused an earthquake in Cumbria earlier this year. Fracking is now banned in France. Fracking is the process of pumping under very, very high pressure, pumping water, a mix of water and extremely toxic chemicals, to fracture the rocks, to fracture the shale, and open up channels for the gas to flow. And the problem is, of course, that although most of the toxicity is flushed out, it's not all flushed out. So it percolates through into the water tables and ultimately, of course, into the soil. And in the US, and if you want to see more about this, go watch a film called Gasland. Gasland. You find it on Google video. And in many places in the US where they've been fracking for a number of years now, people can actually set light to their water, their tap water. Because the gas migrates into the water table, and for many people in the US, particularly in the more rural areas, their water comes from the natural aquifers, and they can no longer use the natural aquifers because they're contaminated with the gas. So 90% of the US is gas fueled, and so, you know, once again, we're in a process here where to fuel the hydrocarbon demands of the US, we're also in the process of poisoning the land. Something else then occurred earlier this year, and this is what first got my attention to the Illuminati cards. Because this is a young lad in Australia who makes his living from online poker, or so he claims. And earlier this year, he made a prediction. And it's not the first prediction he'd made. But look at the date. This is Facebook. You can't forge this. The day you post on Facebook, the date and the time is logged automatically. March the 7th, this is Australian time, 2:39 in the morning, Australian time. Mitchell Coombs writes, "Okay everyone, you've been warned of what's to come. We now have 104 hours to go. Hold on tight. We are in for the shock of your lives." March the 7th, 104 hours. On March the 11th at 10:20 in the morning, Australian time, he writes, "So what a great start to the year. Queensland's worst floods in history, Queensland's worst cyclone in history, New Zealand's worst earthquake in its history, 6.6 earthquake in China on Wednesday, tsunami in Japan later tonight." What's next on the agenda? So he predicted 104 hours, and then he's basically saying later tonight, Australian time, a tsunami is going to hit Japan. And then afterwards, he writes, "I was correct to the exact hour once again. Just like with the New Zealand earthquake, Cyclone Yassi, Queensland floods, you were all warned well in advance. If you didn't watch my videos, I posted about the Pacific tsunami, the Sherman Fault." And he was starting to get a little bit aggressive here because people were basically writing saying, why didn't you make more effort to let us know? It's always the way. But anyway, so I contacted the guy and I said, okay, this is impressive. How did you know? How did you know? And that was when he said, the Illuminati cards. Now, I've been aware of the Illuminati cards, but I've never really taken them that seriously. Has anybody here not heard of the Illuminati cards? Okay, a few of you. It's a game. It's a game that was developed in the mid-90s by a guy called Steve Jackson, of Steve Jackson Games. The guy's a professional games maker, been a games maker since the mid-70s, based in Austin, Texas. He was one of the first guys to develop computer war games, and absolutely the first guy to develop interactive computer war games where people could play each other through the internet, which he developed way back in the early 90s. In 1990, his premises were raided by the FBI with some other, in his words, spooks in tow. So he says it was FBI and CIA. And they took all his computers. There was no warning, they just came in, took all his computers, and they said he was under investigation. And when he asked, somebody said, well, tax, but he wasn't very convincing. Anyway, he lost all his computers, the business was effectively shut down for a few days. And when they came back, there was no real explanation whatsoever. Just giving everything back. Some discs had been wiped, but basically it was an inconvenience as opposed to a catastrophe. But 5 years later, 5 years after that raid, the Illuminati cards appeared. And it started out as a set, it's a game. Does anybody here remember the game Risk? Yeah, Risk. And Risk is like the global version of Monopoly, isn't it? It's world domination. Well, the Illuminati cards is a sort of a similar version of that, if you like. And in these cards, they got lucky on a couple of predictions. This is from the original set of cards, 1995. What does it look like? It's 9/11, isn't it? Now, get lucky, they take the cards out of the pack. Each time an event happens, they take the cards out of the subsequent packs that they issue, replacing with other cards. And all the time they're issuing new packs, small packs, so that you can add to your game. But this is from 1995, and of course they label this as a terrorist nuke, which may be closer to the truth than most people realise regarding the Twin Towers, which we'll look at in a second. And the Pentagon. But of course this one wasn't a plane coming into the side of the Pentagon, this one just shows something going off in the middle of the Pentagon. Well, in a 1998 pack, they updated the Pentagon card to make it this one. So now what they've got is they've got the same basic Pentagon model with a fire in the middle, but this time they've got what looks like a guy in pilot's uniform. Well, this was 1998, remember? But in 2000, in fact in October of 2000, the Pentagon actually ran an exercise. And in this exercise, the exercise was based around a plane crashing into the middle of the Pentagon, and of course it was a hypothetical exercise as to how the Pentagon would handle such an event of a plane crashing into the middle of the courtyard of the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon used to use external consultants to write the scripts for these games. And in this particular situation, they used a former Navy pilot by the name of Chuck Burlingame. And Chuck Burlingame had left the military, although he was still engaged from time to time as a consultant. But he left the military and was now working for American Airlines. And he was the author of this game that was played out as a Pentagon exercise on October 24th to 26th, 2000. In a remarkable coincidence, Chuck Burlingame was allegedly the pilot of Flight 77. the plane that flew into the Pentagon on 9/11, allegedly, on 9/11/2001. Isn't that a remarkable coincidence? Absolutely remarkable coincidence. So once again, another card has to be taken out of the pack. So now we've got three. Well, actually, there's another card that was taken out of the pack before that, because the first hit they got was Princess Di. The Princess Di card. So of course the Princess Di card had to come out after August 31st, 1977. So we've got the Princess Di card that's removed. We've got the Twin Towers and the Pentagon cards removed, and then the updated Pentagon card removed. And then a couple of other cards. Yeah, that was one of the cards from the original pack, the oil spill, and this is a photograph that was doing the rounds after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster. And then you know what I was talking about with the genetically modified biology, and I said that initially when we first saw the symptoms in the Gulf of Mexico, we thought it was Vibrio voldificus, which is a flesh-eating bacteria. Well, this is what we've got with the genetically modified microbiology. So how did Mitchell Coombs work out the exact time of the tsunami from the Illuminati cards? Now this is his explanation. Well, this card, the early warning card. And he uses them a bit like tarot. And when I show you something in a little while, that might not seem quite so strange. He uses them a bit like tarot cards. And we have the earthquake projector. And by the way, you may or may not know, but the tsunami early warning system had been switched off on the morning of March the 11th. Just like all the cameras were switched off, in Gondola Tunnel on the day of August 31st, and the cameras weren't working in London on the day of 7/7. And here, in the Pacific, we have the tsunami early warning system apparently switched off, and the seismic sensors were switched off too. The tidal wave, the nuclear accident, and this card, the combined disasters card. Combined disasters card. Now Mitchell claims basically that he effectively drew all these cards together. The last card becomes the combined disaster card. It's a combined disaster card that effectively gave him the insight. And what was it about that card that gave him the insight? Look at that clock. See that clock? The clock tower over on the right-hand side there. There it is. That's the clock tower. The clock hands, by the way, look as though they're set at 11:11. Interestingly. But anyway, Mitchell being to be 11/3, 3/11, March 11th. That was how he claims he came up with the time, 11 o'clock on March the 11th. But how he nailed the location, that clock tower bears remarkable resemblance to the clock tower in the card. That clock tower is the Waco clock tower in Tokyo. Now, he may have got lucky, but let me tell you that Mitchell Coombs has been lucky a lot of times in terms of his predictions. But there may be another reason for that, which I'll show you a bit later on. Now, this event, Fukushima, right from the outset, funnily enough, call me a conspiracy theorist, but funnily enough, I had my suspicions. Because these events, I've learned, are rarely random. Rarely random. You've just got to look for the template. Okay? Thanks very much. Thanks. And one of the beauties of people starting to sort of wake up to things that are going on is, way back, even just sort of 10 years ago, 9/11, there was a handful of us around the world who were looking at this stuff. A handful. And it will take us months individually to sort of get sufficient data together. I mean, when I first started looking at 9/11, which was basically October of 2001, it took me until April the following year in 2002.